Isabelle Martinez thought she had escaped, living in her own apartment in downtown Phoenix, working as a pediatric nurse, building a life where bruises were something she treated on other people's children, not something she hid under long sleeves and careful makeup. But some prisons have invisible bars, and some chains are forged from guilt, fear, and the desperate need to protect the people you love most. What Isabelle didn't know was that her younger sister, Emma, now 16, had been sending silent cries for help through the one window the whole world could see, if only someone knew where to look. The doorbell camera her stepfather installed for security had been recording everything, every raised voice, every slammed door, every moment of terror that Isabelle thought she'd left behind when she moved out 3 years ago. Sometimes the very thing meant to keep secrets becomes the key to setting everyone free. This is the story of how one woman discovered that running away isn't the same as healing, and how the courage to face the truth can break cycles that have lasted for generations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Isabelle Martinez pulled into the parking lot of Phoenix Children's Hospital at 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes before her shift started. Exactly the way she liked it. Routine was safety. Predictability was peace. In the controlled chaos of the pediatric ward, she had found something that had eluded her for most of her 23 years, a sense of purpose that wasn't tangled up in fear. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, smoothing down her dark hair and adjusting the small silver cross necklace her grandmother had given her, the only piece of jewelry she wore to work. Professional, competent, in control. These were the qualities she projected, and after 3 years of practice, they had become second nature. The automatic doors of the hospital whooshed open, and Isabelle breathed in the familiar scent of antiseptic and hope. It was a smell that reminded her why she'd chosen pediatric nursing, despite everyone's warnings about the emotional toll. Children healed differently than adults. They bounced back from trauma with a resilience that amazed her daily. They didn't carry their pain the way grown-ups did, letting it settle into their bones and change the shape of their entire lives. "Morning, Belle," called Dr. Patricia Chen from behind the nurse's station. At 38, Dr. Chen was everything Isabelle aspired to be: confident, respected, and completely in command of her environment. "How was your weekend?" "Quiet," Isabelle replied, which was both true and deliberately vague. Her weekends were always quiet. She grocery shopped on Saturday mornings when the stores were less crowded, meal prepped for the week, did laundry, and spent Sunday afternoons reading medical journals or watching Netflix documentaries about anything except families in crisis. She had crafted a life of beautiful, peaceful solitude. "You know," Dr. Chen said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "there's a new resident in the ER who's been asking about you. David something. Seems nice, and he's actually age-appropriate, unlike the last one." Isabelle felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came whenever anyone suggested she should be dating. "I'm not really looking for anything right now," she said, the practiced response rolling off her tongue. "Too focused on work." Dr. Chen studied her for a moment with the same penetrating gaze she used to assess her young patients. "Belle, you're an incredible nurse, but you're 23 years old. You can't live in this hospital forever." But the hospital was exactly where Isabelle wanted to live, metaphorically speaking. Within these walls, she understood the rules. Pain had clear causes and established treatment protocols. Healing followed predictable patterns. There were no gray areas, no walking on eggshells, no wondering if tonight would be one of the good nights or one of the nights when everyone held their breath and tried to become invisible. Her first patient of the day was Marcus Thompson, recovering from appendicitis surgery. His mother, Sandra, had been at his bedside for 3 days straight, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair and refusing offers to go home and rest. "How's our brave boy doing this morning?" Isabelle asked, checking Marcus's vital signs while he colored in a superhero coloring book.
Better, Sandra replied, though the worry lines around her eyes suggested she wouldn't truly believe it until they were home. He actually asked for pancakes this morning, which has to be a good sign, right? Isabelle smiled, the first genuine expression that had crossed her face all day. That's a very good sign. Kids who ask for specific foods are usually on the mend. As she adjusted Marcus's IV, she noticed Sandra watching her every move with the hyper-vigilance of a mother who had learned that the world could be dangerous for small bodies. It was a look Isabelle recognized, though she tried not to think about why. "You're really good with him," Sandra said quietly. "He usually doesn't like strangers touching him, but he trusts you immediately. That's a gift." The compliment should have made her feel proud, but instead it stirred something uncomfortable in her chest. Trust was dangerous. Trust meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant people could hurt you in ways that left marks no one could see. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and she glanced at it while finishing Marcus's chart. The name on the screen made her stomach drop. Mom. "Emma has a school event Thursday. Family dinner Sunday. Hope to see you. Love you." She stared at the message for several seconds, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. 3 years of carefully maintained distance, and her mother still sent these gentle invitations that felt more like barely concealed commands. She could picture her mother composing the text, choosing each word carefully to avoid saying anything that might be construed as pressure, while making it clear that absence would be noticed and noted. She typed back, "Work is crazy this week. We'll try to call Emma later." It was a lie. Work wasn't crazy. It was her sanctuary. But going back to that house, even for a Sunday dinner, felt like stepping back into a skin that no longer fit. The Isabelle who lived in that house had been smaller somehow, more careful, always listening for footsteps, and reading the subtle signs that indicated whether it was safe to speak or better to disappear into her room.
The rest of her shift passed in its usual rhythm of medication rounds, chart updates, and small moments of connection with young patients who reminded her why she'd chosen this profession. But the text from her mother lingered in the back of her mind like a persistent headache. At 7 p.m., after giving report to the night shift, Isabelle sat in her car in the hospital parking lot and called her sister Emma. The phone rang 4 times before Emma picked up, and when she did, her voice sounded strangely breathless. "Isabelle? Hi, sorry, I was just studying." "Hey, Em, how's school going? Mom mentioned you have some kind of event this week." "Oh, that. It's just the academic showcase. I'm presenting my chemistry project. It's not a big deal." But Emma's voice had that careful quality that Isabelle remembered from her own teenage years, the tone that said everything was fine while telegraphing that nothing was fine at all. "I'm sorry I can't be there," Isabelle said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. "But I'm proud of you. You've always been the smart one." "You could come," Emma said quietly. "I mean, if you wanted to. It's not like you live across the country or anything. You're only 40 minutes away." 40 minutes might as well have been 4,000 miles. "Work is really demanding right now, Em. You know how it is." There was a long pause, and Isabelle could hear something in the background, a door slamming maybe, or something heavy being moved. Then Emma's voice came back higher and brighter than before. "Yeah, of course. I understand. Work is important." "Is everything okay there?" Isabelle asked, the nurse in her recognizing the signs of someone trying too hard to sound normal. "Everything's great," Emma replied quickly. "Really good. Brad's been helping me with my college applications, and Mom's been good. She asks about you a lot." Brad, their stepfather of 8 years, who had married their mother when Emma was 8 and Isabelle was 15. The man who had brought stability and financial security to their small family after years of struggle. The man who had clear ideas about respect and discipline and the proper way to run a household. "That's good," Isabelle said, though the words tasted like ash in her mouth. "I should let you get back to studying. Tell Mom I said hi." After she hung up, Isabelle sat in the darkening parking lot and tried to shake the feeling that something in Emma's voice had been off. But she'd been away for 3 years now.
Maybe she was just imagining things, projecting her own complicated feelings onto a sister who had learned to navigate that household in ways Isabelle never had. She drove to her apartment, a modest one-bedroom in a complex with good security and neighbors who minded their own business, and heated up leftover Thai food while watching the evening news. The anchor was talking about Domestic Violence Awareness Month, interviewing a local advocate who spoke passionately about the importance of believing survivors and understanding that leaving an abusive situation was rarely simple or straightforward. Isabelle changed the channel. Later, as she prepared for bed, she caught sight of herself in the bedroom mirror and was struck by how much she looked like her mother. The same dark eyes, the same slight build, the same way of holding her shoulders as if she were trying to take up less space in the world. But where her mother had always seemed fragile, like something that might break if handled roughly, Isabelle had built herself into something stronger. She had to be stronger. She was the one who had gotten out. As she brushed her teeth, she thought about Marcus Thompson and his mother's fierce protectiveness, about Dr. Chen's concern for her social life, and about Emma's carefully bright voice on the phone. She thought about the life she had built for herself, safe, predictable, and utterly alone. It was a good life, she told herself as she turned off the lights. It was exactly the life she had planned and worked for. If it sometimes felt like she was living behind glass, watching other people experience the messiness and joy of real connection, while she remained safely on the outside, well, that was a small price to pay for peace. She had escaped. She had built something new. That had to be enough. But as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the image of Emma's voice on the phone, or the way her sister had said everything's great, with just a little too much emphasis, the same way Isabelle herself used to say it whenever anyone asked how things were at home. Some patterns, she was beginning to realize, were harder to break than others.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. 3 days after her phone call with Emma, Isabelle was restocking supplies in the pediatric ward when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the Phoenix area code made her stomach tighten with familiar anxiety. "This is Isabelle," she answered, stepping into an empty patient room for privacy. "Miss Martinez? This is Principal Rebecca Walsh from Desert Ridge High School. I'm calling about your sister, Emma Martinez." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Isabelle gripped the phone tighter. "Is she hurt? What happened?" "Emma's fine physically," Principal Walsh said quickly. "But she didn't come to school today, and when we called your mother to check on her, the call went straight to voicemail. Emma's listed you as an emergency contact, so I wanted to reach out. She's been... well, there have been some concerning changes in her behavior lately." Isabelle's mind raced. Emma never missed school. She was the responsible one, the straight-A student who had college applications due in just a few weeks. What kind of changes? "She's been falling asleep in class. Her grades have dropped significantly in the past month, and her chemistry teacher mentioned that she seemed distracted during her academic showcase presentation yesterday. She also..." Principal Walsh paused, choosing her words carefully. "She's been wearing long sleeves, even on very warm days, and when she thought no one was looking, I noticed her favoring her left side when she walked." The fluorescent lights in the hospital room suddenly felt too bright. Isabelle closed her eyes and saw herself at 16, perfecting the art of strategic clothing choices and careful posture. "Have you spoken to her about this?" "I've tried, but she insists everything is fine at home. She's very protective of your family's privacy. However, as an educator with 22 years of experience, I've learned to recognize certain patterns. I think Emma could use someone to talk to, someone she trusts who isn't in her immediate household." After hanging up, Isabelle stood in the empty room, her hands shaking slightly. She told herself there could be innocent explanations. Emma was a teenager dealing with college stress. Maybe she'd gotten into a minor accident. Maybe she was just overwhelmed. But even as she tried to rationalize it, another part of her, the part that had learned to read dangerous atmospheres like a meteorologist reading storm systems, knew better.
That evening, instead of going home, Isabelle drove toward her childhood neighborhood in Scottsdale. She hadn't been back in over a year, and the familiar streets felt like traveling backward through time. The house looked exactly the same, a modest two-story with desert landscaping, and the black Ring doorbell camera Brad had installed 2 years ago, claiming it would help them keep track of packages and unwanted visitors. She parked 3 houses down, close enough to see but far enough away to avoid being noticed. At 7:30 p.m., she watched Brad's silver pickup truck pull into the driveway. Even from a distance, she could see the rigid set of his shoulders as he got out of the truck, the way he slammed the door just a little too hard. She recognized the signs. It had been a bad day at the construction site, which meant it would probably be a bad evening for everyone else. Through the living room window, she caught glimpses of movement. Her mother, Maria, bustling around what was probably dinner preparation. Emma, visible briefly as she moved past the window, her posture somehow smaller than Isabelle remembered. Isabelle sat in her car as darkness fell, wrestling with memories she'd spent 3 years trying to bury. She remembered the sound of Brad's truck in the driveway and the way it made everyone in the house unconsciously hold their breath. She remembered learning to read his moods in the set of his jaw, the heaviness of his footsteps, the way he closed cabinets and drawers. She remembered her mother's bright, cheerful voice that got slightly higher when she was nervous, asking about his day while her hands moved constantly, wiping counters that were already clean, adjusting things that didn't need adjusting. At 9:15 p.m., Isabelle finally drove away, but she couldn't shake what she'd seen, or rather, what she had felt. The familiar electricity in the air around that house, the sense that everyone inside was performing an elaborate dance to avoid stepping on invisible landmines. The next morning, she called in sick to work for the first time in 18 months. Instead, she drove to Desert Ridge High School and waited in the parking lot until she saw Emma walking toward the building. Her sister looked tired, her usual confident stride replaced by something more careful and measured. When Isabelle spotted her car, her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked like fear. "What are you doing here?" Emma asked as she approached the passenger side window. "Principal Walsh called me yesterday. She's concerned about you." Emma's face flushed red. "She had no right to call me. I'm fine. Em, get in the car, please."
For a moment, Emma looked like she might refuse, but then she glanced around the parking lot and slid into the passenger seat. Up close, Isabelle could see the dark circles under her sister's eyes, the way she held herself as if something hurt. "You look exhausted," Isabelle said gently. "I've been staying up late working on college applications. It's stressful, you know? Some of us don't have the luxury of running away when things get complicated." The words hit like a physical blow, but Isabelle tried not to react. "Is that what you think I did? Ran away?" Emma stared out the windshield, her jaw tight. "Didn't you?" They sat in silence for several minutes, watching other students stream past the car toward the school entrance. Finally, Emma spoke again, her voice smaller than before. "He's been different lately. More intense. Mom says it's because work has been stressful, that the construction industry is unpredictable, and he's worried about money. She says we need to be more understanding, more helpful around the house." Emma picked at her fingernails, a nervous habit she developed as a child. "I've been trying really hard to be good, to not cause any problems, but sometimes I feel like just existing in that house is causing problems." Isabella's heart clenched. She remembered that feeling, the exhausting hypervigilance, the constant calculation of whether it was safe to speak, to move, to simply be present. Has he hurt you?" Emma's head snapped up, and for just a moment, Isabelle saw raw fear in her sister's eyes before the teenager's careful mask slipped back into place. "He's not abusive, if that's what you're asking. He's just strict. He has high standards. Mom says that's what makes him a good provider, that we should be grateful someone cares enough to want us to be better." The words sounded rehearsed, like something Emma had been told to say. Isabelle recognized the language, the way abuse got reframed as caring, the way victims were taught to be grateful for the very thing that was destroying them. You know you can tell me anything, right? No matter what it is, no matter what anyone has told you about keeping family business private. Emma was quiet for so long that Isabelle thought she might not answer. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "Remember how you used to tell me bedtime stories when I was little? Even after Mom married Brad, you'd still come to my room and tell me stories about brave princesses who saved themselves?" Isabelle nodded, her throat tight. "I've been thinking about those stories a lot lately, about what it means to be brave." Emma turned to look at her directly for the first time since getting in the car. "I think maybe brave doesn't always look the way we expect it to." Before Isabelle could respond, Emma was getting out of the car. "I have to get to class. I can't afford to miss any more school." As Isabelle watched her sister walk toward the building, noting the careful way Emma moved, the slight hesitation before she pulled open the heavy door, she felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. For 3 years, she had told herself that leaving was enough, that building her own safe life was sufficient, that the price of her peace was worth whatever she had left behind. But seeing Emma now, recognizing her own teenage self in her sister's careful movements and practice explanations, Isabelle realized that some forms of safety were actually just elaborate forms of abandonment. That afternoon, she called Dr. Chen and requested a meeting with the hospital's social work department. If she was going to help Emma, she needed to understand her options. She needed to know what resources were available, what legal protections existed, what evidence would be required if things were as bad as she was beginning to suspect. As she walked through the hospital corridors toward the social work office, Isabelle felt like she was approaching the edge of a cliff. For 3 years, she had lived in careful isolation, protecting herself from the messiness and danger of getting involved. But protection, she was beginning to realize, might just be another word for paralysis. The social worker, Janet Liu, was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the sort of calm competence that came from years of dealing with family crises. She listened as Isabelle explained her concerns, taking careful notes and asking thoughtful questions. The challenge is that emotional and psychological abuse can be harder to document than physical abuse. And if your sister isn't ready to disclose what's happening, our options are limited. But there are things we can do to create a safety net, to let her know that help is available when she's ready to accept it. Walking back to her car after the meeting, Isabelle felt simultaneously overwhelmed and oddly energized. She had spent 3 years believing that the only way to survive trauma was to escape it completely. But maybe survival could look different. Maybe it could look like turning around and extending a hand to someone else who was still trapped in the place that you had managed to leave. That evening, she sent Emma a text. "I love you. I'm here if you need me, for anything, no questions asked." The response came back an hour later. "I know. I love you too." It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. And for the first time in years, Isabelle felt like she might be moving towards something instead of just running away from it.
2 weeks passed after Isabelle's conversation with Emma at the school parking lot. During those 14 days, she found herself checking her phone obsessively, analyzing every text message from her sister for hidden meanings, and lying awake at night constructing elaborate scenarios of intervention. The careful routine that had sustained her for 3 years began to crack under the weight of her growing anxiety. It was a Tuesday evening when everything changed. Isabelle was reviewing patient charts at home when her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Telemarketers had been particularly aggressive lately, but something made her pick up on the 4th ring. "Hello?" The voice was barely a whisper. So quiet, Isabelle had to press the phone hard against her ear. "Isabelle, it's me. Emma." But Emma's voice had never sounded like this. Raw, frightened, desperately quiet. "Em, where are you? What's wrong?" "I'm in my closet. They think I'm asleep." Emma's words came in rushed bursts, punctuated by the sound of muffled shouting in the background. "He found my college application essays today, the ones where I wrote about wanting to study social work, about wanting to help families in crisis.
He said I was airing dirty laundry, making our family look dysfunctional to get sympathy from admissions committees. Isabel's stomach dropped. She could hear Brad's voice through the phone now, distant but unmistakably angry. Emma, are you safe right now? I don't know. Mom's trying to calm him down, but he's different when he gets like this. Scary different. And he kept asking if I'd been talking to you, if you'd been putting ideas in my head about college and independence, and Emma's voice broke. He said college was a waste of money for someone who couldn't even show proper respect at home. Through the phone, Isabelle heard Brad's door slam so hard it seemed to shake the walls. Emma's breathing became more rapid. "He's coming upstairs," Emma whispered. "I have to go." "Emma, wait!" The line went dead. Isabelle stared at her phone, her hands trembling. Every instinct screamed at her to get in her car and drive to that house immediately. But what would she do when she got there? Bang on the door and demand to see her sister? Call her police and report what? That her stepfather was angry about college applications? Janet Liu had been clear about the limitations of the system. Without Emma being ready to make a formal complaint, without visible physical evidence, there was little legal recourse available. And Isabelle knew from experience how skilled Brad was at maintaining his public image as a devoted stepfather who'd taken on the challenge of raising two difficult girls. She paced her small apartment, constructing and discarding plan after plan. Call her mother? Maria would just insist that Emma was being dramatic, that Brad was under stress, that families sometimes had loud disagreements. Drive to the house and wait outside? That would only escalate things and potentially put Emma in more danger. At 11:30 p.m., her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "I'm okay. False alarm. Brad just needed to blow off steam. Going to bed now." The message was so unlike Emma's usual texting style. Formal, carefully worded, completely devoid of personality, that Isabelle knew someone else had either written it or dictated it. She spent the rest of the night researching domestic violence resources online, learning about safety planning and documentation strategies. She read testimonials from survivors that made her chest tight with recognition, and she began to understand that the emotional terrorism she'd experienced in that house had a name, a pattern, a predictable escalation. The next morning, Isabelle made a decision that would have been unthinkable just a month earlier. She called in sick to work again, the second time in 3 weeks, which would definitely be noticed, and drove to a coffee shop near Emma's school. She sent her sister a text. "I'm at Grind Coffee on Tatham. Can you meet me during lunch?" The response came back quickly. "Can't. Have to go straight home after school. Brad's new rule." New rule. Isabelle felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November weather. Isolation was always one of the first strategies. Cut off the victim support systems, monitor their communications, control their movements. She remembered her own senior year of high school, how opportunities to spend time with friends had mysteriously disappeared, how every invitation had been met with logistical obstacles or family obligations. Instead of going home, she drove to the neighborhood where she'd grown up and parked 2 blocks away from the house. She felt ridiculous, like some kind of amateur stalker, but she needed to see Emma, needed to assess the situation with her own eyes. At 3:45 p.m., she watched Emma's red Honda Civic pull into the driveway. Even from a distance, she could see that her sister sat in the car for several minutes before going inside, as if gathering courage for whatever awaited her beyond the front door. As Isabelle debated whether to approach the house, her phone rang. Dr. Chen. "Belle, I'm concerned about you. 2 sick days in 3 weeks, and you seem distracted when you are here. Is everything all right?" Isabelle closed her eyes, torn between her professional responsibilities and the growing certainty that her sister was in danger. "I'm dealing with a family situation. It's complicated." "Do you need to take some time off? We can arrange coverage if you need a few days to handle whatever's going on." The offer should have been a relief, but instead it highlighted how dramatically her life had shifted in just a few weeks. 3 years of careful stability, and now she was calling in sick and sitting in her car outside her childhood home like some kind of detective. But Emma's frightened whisper from the night before echoed in her mind, and she realized that stability meant nothing if it was built on someone else's suffering. Actually, yes, I think I do need some time. After hanging up, Isabelle sat in her car and forced herself to think strategically. If she was going to help Emma, she needed more than just suspicions and worried phone calls. She needed a plan that would actually work.
That evening, she drove to a Best Buy and purchased something she'd never thought she'd need, a small digital voice recorder. It felt melodramatic and vaguely illegal, but Janet Liu had mentioned that documentation was crucial in domestic violence cases. If Emma could safely record incidents, it might provide the evidence needed to get real help. The next challenge was getting the device to Emma without arousing suspicion. Isabelle remembered that her sister had mentioned working at a local tutoring center on weekends, one of the few activities Brad had approved because it demonstrated responsibility and brought in some income for college expenses. Saturday morning, Isabelle waited in the parking lot of Learning Plus Academy until she saw Emma's car pull in. Her sister looked tired, but startled to see Isabelle there. "What are you doing here?" Emma asked as she approached Isabelle's car, glancing around nervously. "I brought you something." Isabelle handed over a small gift bag. "It's a digital recorder. If things escalate at home, if you feel unsafe, you can document what's happening. Keep it heading. Only use it when you're sure you won't get caught, but—" Emma stared at the bag as if it contained a live grenade. "Isabelle, I can't. If he found something like this, if he thought I was recording him—" "I know it's scary, but Em, what happened the other night when you called me, that wasn't normal family stress. That was something else, and I think you know it." Emma's hands were shaking as she held the bag. "You don't understand what it's like there now. He's gotten so much worse since you left. It's like he blames Mom and me for you abandoning the family. Every conversation becomes about respect and appreciation and how we don't appreciate what we have." She looked up at Isabelle with eyes that seemed much older than 16. "Sometimes I think he resents having to take care of us at all, like we're this burden he inherited and now he's stuck with." "Then why does Mom stay?" "Because she's terrified," Emma said simply. "She keeps saying that at least we have stability now, that we're not moving every 6 months or worrying about rent money like we did before Brad. She acts like any problems we have are small prices to pay for financial security." Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "But Isabelle, I don't think they're small problems anymore. I think they're getting bigger." Looking at her sister, really seeing the exhaustion in her face, the careful way she held herself, the fear in her eyes when she mentioned going home, Isabelle felt something crystallize inside her chest. This wasn't about her own healing anymore, or her own need to stay safely distant from family drama. This was about a 16-year-old girl who was trapped in a situation that was slowly destroying her spirit, just like it had nearly destroyed Isabelle's. "Keep the recorder," Isabelle said firmly. "Use it or don't use it, but keep it as an option. And Emma, I want you to know something. When I left for college and then moved to my own place, I told myself I was giving you space to have a normal relationship with Brad, that my being gone would make things easier for everyone. But I think I was wrong. I think I was just protecting myself." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "You couldn't have stayed. It would have killed you." "Maybe, but I should have found a way to take you with me, or to stay connected, or to—" Isabelle paused, trying to find the right words. "I should have found a way to escape that didn't mean leaving you behind." For the first time in their conversation, Emma smiled, though it was watery and brief. "I'm glad you got out, Isabelle. Really, it gives me hope that it's possible." As Isabelle watched her sister walk toward the tutoring center, she realized that hope was exactly what had been missing from her carefully constructed life. She'd built something safe and predictable, but she'd forgotten to build something meaningful. She'd survived, but she hadn't really lived. That afternoon, she made another decision that surprised her. She called her mother. "Isabelle, what a wonderful surprise.
Maria's voice was bright with genuine pleasure. "How are you, Mihan?" "I'm concerned about Emma. She seems stressed about college applications and everything." There was a pause, and when Maria spoke again, her voice was more careful. "She's been a little overwhelmed lately. Senior year is difficult, and Brad has high expectations. But that's good, right? Someone who cares about her future." "Mom, has Brad ever... does he lose his temper with Emma?" Another pause, longer this time. "All parents get frustrated sometimes. You know how you were at that age, defiant, always questioning everything. Emma can be the same way. Brad just wants her to understand that respect and appreciation are important family values." The familiar deflection, the careful reframing of abuse as care. Isabelle recognized the script because she'd heard it her entire teenage years. But now, from the outside, she could hear how hollow it sounded. "Mom, if Emma ever needed help, if the situation at home ever became difficult, you know she could come stay with me, right?" "Isabelle Rosa Martinez," her mother's voice sharpened with warning. "I don't know what Emma has been telling you, but this family doesn't air its private business. We handle our problems internally, with respect and maturity." After hanging up, Isabelle sat in her apartment and realized that her decision point had already passed. She was no longer weighing whether to get involved. She was already involved. The only question now was how far she was willing to go to protect her sister, and what she was willing to risk in the process. The safe life she'd built suddenly felt less like an achievement and more like a preparation. She'd learned to be strong, to be independent, to trust her own judgment. Now it was time to use those skills for something bigger than just her own survival. That night, she started researching family lawyers who specialized in custody cases and domestic violence situations. If Emma was going to need help escaping, Isabelle was going to be ready.
Isabelle's first week off work became a crash course in the complexities of domestic violence intervention. What had seemed straightforward in her mind, help Emma, gather evidence, find a solution, quickly revealed itself to be a maze of legal limitations, bureaucratic procedures, and psychological barriers she hadn't anticipated. Her appointment with family attorney David Reeves on Monday morning was both enlightening and devastating. Reeves, a man in his 50s with 23 years of experience in family law, listened patiently as Isabelle explained the situation, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "The challenge we face," he said when she finished, "is that Emma is 16. In Arizona, she can't simply choose to leave home and live with you without either parental consent or court intervention, and court intervention requires substantial evidence of abuse or neglect." But what about emancipation? Could she apply for that? Emancipation requires proving she can financially support herself, which is nearly impossible for a high school student. Additionally, the court would likely require testimony about why emancipation is necessary, which means Emma would have to publicly detail the abuse, if she's even ready to acknowledge it as abuse. Isabelle felt her carefully constructed plan crumbling. So she's basically trapped until she turns 18? Not necessarily. If we can document a pattern of abuse, we could petition for temporary guardianship or seek intervention from Child Protective Services. But the burden of proof is significant, and the process can take months. In the meantime, if your stepfather discovers that Emma is building a case against him, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Isabelle understood that her attempts to help could potentially make Emma's situation much worse. Wednesday brought another obstacle she hadn't foreseen. Dr. Chen called to check on her, and during their conversation, Isabelle realized how isolated she'd become from her professional support system. Her colleagues knew nothing about her family background, her past, or her current crisis. She'd been so committed to keeping her two worlds separate that she now had no one at work she could confide in. "Belle, you've been one of our most reliable nurses for 3 years. Taking time off isn't like you. If there's something we can do to help, some kind of support the hospital can provide." For a moment, Isabelle considered telling her everything. Dr. Chen was a mandated reporter. She'd know the proper channels, the right people to contact. But something held her back. Perhaps the ingrained family loyalty that made it feel like betrayal to expose Brad's behavior to outsiders. Or maybe the fear that involving too many people would somehow backfire. "It's just a family situation that needs some attention," Isabelle said finally. "I should be back to work next week." But even as she said it, she wondered if that was true.
The more she learned about domestic violence intervention, the more she realized this wasn't going to be a quick fix that would allow her to return to her normal routine. Thursday evening brought the first real breakthrough, though it came wrapped in heartbreak. Emma called, and for the first time, she sounded different. Not the careful, controlled voice Isabelle had grown accustomed to, but something rawer and more honest. "I used the recorder," Emma said without preamble. "Just once, but..." Isabelle, listening to it afterwards, was horrible. I could hear myself trying so hard to say the right things, to not make him angrier, and I could hear him getting more and more frustrated no matter what I said. It was like watching myself disappear. Isabelle's heart pounded. "Are you safe to talk right now?" "He's at poker night with his friends, and Mom went to her book club. I have maybe an hour." Emma's voice dropped. "The recording is really bad, Isabelle. Like, worse than I thought it was happening. When you're in the middle of it, you're so focused on surviving the moment that you don't realize how wrong it all sounds from the outside. Can you tell me what happened?" Isabelle closed her eyes, remembering that particular tone. It was worse than yelling somehow, the calm, measured delivery of words designed to make you feel worthless. "He made me delete all my research and told me that if I was going to college at all, it would be to Arizona State so I could live at home and learn some responsibility. Then he said that maybe college wasn't a good investment for someone who couldn't even show basic loyalty to their family. Isabelle, I've worked so hard for good grades. I've been planning for college since I was 12, and in 10 minutes, he just took it all away."
The recording was a step forward in terms of evidence, but Isabelle could hear the costs it had taken on Emma's emotional state. Her sister sounded hollow, defeated in a way that made Isabelle want to drive to that house immediately and extract Emma by force. "Em, you know that what he said isn't true, right? About college, about loyalty, about any of it? I know that intellectually, but when someone says those things to you with such certainty, when they have complete control over your life, it's hard not to believe them, at least a little bit." Friday brought an unexpected ally. Isabelle had decided to visit Dr. Sarah Martinez, no relation despite the shared surname, a trauma therapist who specialized in family violence. She'd found Dr. Martinez through the resources Janet Liu had provided, and while she couldn't afford long-term therapy, she hoped one consultation might give her better strategies for helping Emma. Dr. Martinez was a woman in her early 40s with an office full of plants and soft lighting that immediately made Isabelle feel calmer. After explaining the situation, Isabelle found herself talking not just about Emma's current crisis, but about her own experiences growing up in that household. "What you're describing," Dr. Martinez said, "is a family system built around control and fear. Your stepfather uses emotional manipulation and the threat of withdrawal of resources to maintain power. Your mother has learned to enable this behavior as a survival strategy, and both you and Emma have developed hypervigilance as a way to navigate an unpredictable emotional landscape." Hearing her family dynamics described in clinical terms was both validating and unsettling. So what can I do? How do I help Emma without making things worse? The most important thing you can do is maintain consistent contact and let Emma know she has options, even if she can't exercise them immediately. Victims of emotional abuse often experience learned helplessness. They start to believe they have no choices because their choices have been systematically taken away or punished. Your presence in her life represents proof that escape is possible. Dr. Martinez gave Isabelle several resources, a safety planning worksheet she could share with Emma, information about a confidential crisis text line, and strategies for documenting abuse that wouldn't put Emma at additional risk. However, Dr. Martinez warned, you need to be prepared for the possibility that Emma might not be ready to leave even if an opportunity presents itself. Trauma bonding is real, and victims often feel conflicted about taking action against their abusers, especially when those abusers are also providers and protectors in some ways. That weekend, Isabelle attempted to put some of these strategies into practice. She texted Emma about meeting for coffee, but the response was discouraging. Can't. Brad says I need to focus on family time and local college applications. Maybe next week. The control was tightening. Isabelle recognized the pattern. Restrict the victim's social connections, limit their access to outside perspectives, create an environment where the abuser's worldview becomes the only reality available. Sunday afternoon, she drove past the house again, feeling increasingly like a helpless bystander to her sister's imprisonment. Through the living room window, she could see what appeared to be a family meeting. Brad gesturing while Emma and their mother sat on the couch, both with the rigid posture of people receiving instructions. As she watched, Isabel's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop driving by the house. You're not as subtle as you think. Stay out of family business or there will be consequences. B. Her blood turned to ice. Brad had somehow gotten her number and was actively monitoring the neighborhood. The text was carefully worded, nothing overtly threatening that could be used against him, but the message was clear. That evening, she called the crisis hotline Dr. Martinez had recommended, not for Emma, but for herself. She needed guidance on how to proceed when her attempts to help had been detected and potentially put Emma in more danger. The crisis counselor, a woman named Patricia, listened as Isabelle explained the situation. What you're experiencing is very common, Patricia said. Abusers are hyper-vigilant about threats to their control, and they're skilled at making family members feel responsible for the consequences of outside intervention. So what do I do? Stop trying to help? You adapt your approach. Direct intervention may not be possible right now, but there are other ways to support your sister. Continue to let her know you're available. Document everything, his text to you included. And start building a support network for yourself, because this process is going to be emotionally exhausting. As the week ended, Isabelle realized that her first steps into active intervention had revealed the true scope of the challenge ahead. This wasn't going to be a dramatic rescue mission that concluded with Emma safely moving in with her. This was going to be a long, complex process of patience, strategy, and emotional endurance. But despite the obstacles, despite Brad's threat and the legal limitations and Emma's own conflicted feelings, Isabelle felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose that extended beyond her own safety and comfort. She was no longer just surviving, she was fighting for someone else's chance to survive too. Monday morning, she would return to work and try to rebuild some normalcy in her routine. But her evening hours, her weekends, her emotional energy, all of that was now dedicated to a mission that felt bigger than herself. She was going to find a way to help Emma, even if it meant dismantling the carefully protected life she'd spent 3 years building. The easy answers had evaporated, but her commitment had only grown stronger. This was what courage looked like, she realized. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep moving forward despite being afraid.
Returning to work after her week off felt like stepping back into a different world. The familiar rhythm of patient rounds, medication schedules, and chart updates seemed almost surreal after spending 7 days immersed in legal consultations, crisis hotlines, and surveillance tactics. But it was Dr. Chen's concerned observation that really drove home how much had changed. "You look different," she said during their morning briefing. "More focused, but also more tired. Are you sure you're ready to be back?" Isabelle realized that her carefully maintained professional mask was slipping. For 3 years, she had been able to compartmentalize completely, but now the boundary between her work life and personal crisis felt impossibly thin. "I'm dealing with some family issues that are ongoing, but I need to be here." Dr. Chen studied her for a moment. "Belle, I'm going to share something with you that I probably shouldn't. When I was a resident, my younger brother was in an abusive relationship. I spent 2 years trying to save him, making plans, staging interventions, gathering evidence.
It nearly destroyed my career and my marriage because I couldn't focus on anything else. Isabelle's hands stilled on the patient chart she'd been reviewing. What happened? He wasn't ready to leave until he was ready. All my efforts, all my careful planning, none of it mattered until something clicked for him internally. But what I learned was that sometimes the best way to help someone is to take care of yourself first, to be stable and available when they're finally ready to accept help. The advice felt both wise and impossible to follow. How could she focus on self-care when Emma was trapped in an increasingly controlling situation? But as the morning progressed, Isabelle began to see the wisdom in Dr. Chen's words. Several times she caught herself making small errors, miscalculating medication doses, forgetting to chart vital signs, mistakes that could have serious consequences for her young patients. During her lunch break, she called Dr. Martinez to schedule a follow-up appointment, but also to ask about support groups for family members of abuse victims. If she was going to sustain this effort long-term, she needed to learn from people who had navigated similar situations. There's a group that meets Tuesday evenings at the community center on Indian School Road. It's specifically for family members and friends of domestic violence survivors. The facilitator, Karen Winters, is excellent. She's been doing this work for 15 years. That Tuesday evening, Isabelle found herself sitting in a circle of folding chairs in a fluorescently lit conference room, surrounded by 8 other people who looked just as nervous as she felt. Karen Winters was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and the kind of calm presence that suggested she'd heard every possible variation of family crisis. "Tonight we have a new member," she gestured to Isabelle. "Would you like to share what brought you here?" Isabelle's throat felt tight. She'd never spoken about her family situation to strangers before. "My 16-year-old sister is living with our stepfather, who I believe is emotionally and possibly physically abusive. I've been trying to help her, but I'm not sure I'm doing it right." Around the circle, heads nodded with recognition. These people understood the helpless frustration, the guilt of having escaped while someone else remained trapped, the exhaustion of trying to orchestrate a rescue for someone who might not want to be rescued. An older man named Robert spoke first. "My daughter was in an abusive marriage for 8 years. I made every mistake you can imagine, confronting her husband directly, threatening to cut off contact if she didn't leave, trying to force her into therapy. All it did was drive her further away and give him more ammunition to isolate her." A woman named Sandra added, "The hardest thing I learned was that my need to fix the situation was sometimes more about my own anxiety than about what was actually helpful for my sister. I had to learn to sit with the discomfort of not being able to control the outcome." Over the next hour, Isabelle listened to stories that felt eerily familiar. The careful phone calls where victims spoke in code, the holidays spent pretending everything was normal, the weight of keeping someone else's secret while watching them slowly disappear. But she also heard stories of eventual success, of patience and persistence that had ultimately helped family members escape dangerous situations. Karen offered specific strategies that Isabelle hadn't encountered elsewhere. Document everything, but don't make documentation your primary focus. Maintain connection, but don't make every conversation about the abuse. Learn about trauma responses, but don't try to be your sister's therapist. Most importantly, take care of your own mental health because this process can be re-traumatizing for survivors of abuse. After the meeting, a woman named Lisa approached Isabelle. She was probably in her early 30s with the kind of put-together appearance that suggested she'd also learned to build a successful life after trauma. "I heard something in your story that reminded me of my own situation. Would you like to get coffee sometime? I think we might have some things in common." That Saturday, Isabelle met Lisa at a quiet cafe in Tempe. Lisa's story was remarkably similar. She'd escaped an abusive household at 18, built a career in marketing, and then watched helplessly as her younger sister struggled with her father's escalating control and violence.
"The thing that changed everything for me," Lisa said, "was when I stopped trying to convince my sister that our father was abusive and started helping her develop her own sense of reality. Instead of saying, 'Dad is hurting you,' I started asking questions like,
How did that conversation make you feel? Or what would you do if a friend told you someone spoke to them that way? This approach hadn't occurred to Isabelle. All her conversations with Emma had focused on getting her to acknowledge the abuse and take action. But Lisa was suggesting something more subtle, helping Emma strengthen her own judgment and self-trust. The other thing that made a huge difference, Lisa continued, was when I started sharing my own therapy insights with my sister, not about our father specifically, but about relationships and boundaries in general. I'd mentioned things I was learning about healthy communication or red flags in relationships, just casual conversations that gave her vocabulary for what she was experiencing. That evening, Isabelle called Emma with a different strategy. Instead of asking about Brad or expressing concern about the family situation, she talked about her own week, her patients, her conversations with Dr. Chen, even her attendance at the support group, though she framed it as a professional development opportunity. "You're going to therapy?" Emma asked, sounding surprised. "Not exactly therapy, more like learning about how families deal with stress and conflict. It's been really interesting. Did you know that some communication patterns that seem normal can actually be really harmful over time?" Emma was quiet for several seconds. "What do you mean?" "Well, like when someone uses guilt to control behavior, or when they make you feel responsible for their emotions, or when they isolate you from friends and then blame you for being antisocial." Isabelle kept her tone conversational, academic. The facilitator said these patterns often feel normal if you grow up with them, but they're actually pretty damaging to people's self-esteem and independence. "Huh," Emma said thoughtfully. "That's interesting." It wasn't a breakthrough, but it was different. For the first time, Emma seemed genuinely engaged in a conversation about relationship dynamics, rather than defensive or frightened. Over the following weeks, Isabelle continued attending the support group and developing her friendship with Lisa. She learned about safety planning, about trauma responses, about the complex psychology of abuse victims. But more importantly, she learned about patience, about supporting someone without trying to control their choices, about providing information without pressuring for specific outcomes. Her conversations with Emma began to shift. Instead of asking directly about Brad's behavior, Isabelle would share articles about college scholarships or career opportunities for social workers. Instead of expressing concern about Emma's isolation, she would mention activities happening around Phoenix that might be fun for teenagers. "I saw there's a young women's leadership conference at ASU next month. They're offering scholarships to high school students interested in social justice careers. The application deadline is until December 15th. "I don't think Brad would let me go to something like that," Emma said automatically, then seemed to catch herself. "I mean, I'm pretty busy with college applications right now." "Of course, but if you ever wanted to apply, I'd be happy to help with the application. No pressure, just keeping options open." The seed planting approach felt slow and sometimes frustrating, but Isabelle began to notice small changes in Emma's responses. Her sister started asking more questions about Isabelle's work, about what it was like living independently, about how she'd chosen her career path. These weren't conversations about escape or abuse, but they were conversations about possibility. Dr. Martinez helped Isabelle understand that this gradual approach was actually more effective than dramatic intervention attempts. "You're helping Emma rebuild her sense of agency," she explained during one of their sessions. "Abuse works by convincing victims that they have no choices, no options, no value outside of the abusive relationship. By consistently presenting alternatives and treating her like someone capable of making good decisions, you're counteracting those messages." 3 weeks into this new approach, Emma called with unexpected news. "I applied for that leadership conference," she said. "I know I probably won't get the scholarship, and I know Brad will probably say no even if I do, but I applied. And Isabelle, filling out that application, writing those essays about my goals and my values, it felt like remembering who I used to be before everything got so complicated." For the first time in weeks, Isabelle felt genuinely hopeful. Emma was beginning to reclaim her own voice, her own dreams. It wasn't escape yet, but it was something possibly more important. It was Emma starting to believe in her own worth and potential again.
The mentorship phase was working, slowly and carefully, one conversation at a time. Isabelle was learning that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do for someone was not to rescue them, but to remind them that they were capable of rescuing themselves.
December arrived with an unexpected phone call that would test everything Isabelle had learned about supporting Emma without controlling her choices. It was 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Isabelle was getting ready for work when her phone rang with Emma's number. "I got it," Emma said, her voice breathless with excitement and fear. "The scholarship for the leadership conference. They're offering to cover everything: registration, materials, even lunch. But Isabelle, I have to tell Brad today because the conference is this weekend and I need permission to miss my Saturday tutoring shift." Isabelle's stomach dropped. She could imagine exactly how Brad would respond to Emma announcing she'd applied for something without his knowledge, received recognition for her abilities, and wanted to attend an event focused on youth empowerment and independence. "How are you planning to approach it?" Isabelle asked, forcing herself to stay calm despite the alarm bells going off in her head. "I was thinking I'd tell him at dinner tonight, when Mom's there. He's usually more controlled when she's around. I'll emphasize how it looks good for college applications and how it's focused on leadership skills that would make me more responsible." It was a reasonable strategy, but Isabelle knew Brad well enough to know that no approach would make this news welcome. For months, he'd been tightening control over Emma's activities and future plans. A leadership conference represented everything he feared: outside validation of Emma's abilities, exposure to different perspectives, and connection with mentors who might encourage her independence. I think it's great that you want to go, but have you considered what you'll do if he says no?" There was a long pause. "I guess I'll have to accept it. I mean, what choice do I have?" This was the testing ground, the moment when Emma's newfound sense of agency would either be reinforced or crushed. Isabelle thought about her conversations with Lisa and the support group, about Dr. Martinez's guidance on empowerment versus rescue. "You always have choices," Isabelle said carefully. "They might not be easy choices, and they might come with consequences, but you have more power in this situation than you think." "What do you mean?" "I mean that you're 16, you want a competitive scholarship based on your own merit, and you have every right to pursue opportunities that support your goals. If Brad says no, you could appeal to your mom privately. You could contact the school counselor to see if they'll advocate for you. You could even call me, and we could figure out a way to make it work." Emma was quiet for so long that Isabelle wondered if the call had dropped. Then, in a voice that sounded stronger than it had in months, Emma said, "You would do that? Even if it made Brad angry?" "I would do a lot more than that if it meant supporting your dreams." That evening, Isabelle waited anxiously for Emma's call. When it came at 9:45 p.m., Emma's voice was shaky but determined. "It went about as badly as expected," Emma said. "He said I was being sneaky and disrespectful by applying without permission. He said leadership conferences are just liberal propaganda designed to turn young women against traditional family values. Then he said I obviously don't understand the meaning of loyalty, and maybe I should spend the weekend thinking about what this family has done for me instead of running off to indulge my selfish ambitions." Isabelle gripped the phone tighter. "What did your mom say?" "She tried to suggest a compromise. Maybe I could attend just the morning sessions, or maybe we could look at the conference materials together to make sure they aligned with our family values. But Brad shut that down immediately. He said the decision was final and that any further discussion would result in consequences for both of us." "How are you feeling about all this?" Emma's voice hardened with the resolve Isabelle hadn't heard before. "Angry. Really, really angry. Isabelle, I worked hard for this scholarship. I wrote essays about wanting to help families in crisis, about seeing social justice as a calling, not just a career, and they chose me out of hundreds of applicants. For the first time in months, I felt proud of myself, felt like maybe I had something valuable to offer the world." "You absolutely do have something valuable to offer." "Then why can't I go?
Why does he get to decide that my achievements don't matter, that my dreams are selfish? Why does he get to make me feel guilty for wanting something for myself? This was it. The moment when Emma was ready to stop accepting Brad's version of reality and start trusting her own perceptions. Isabelle chose her words carefully. He doesn't get to decide those things, Em. He's been making you think he has that power, but he doesn't. You're almost an adult, you're clearly capable of making good decisions, and you have every right to pursue opportunities that matter to you. But how? He controls everything. My car, my college fund, even whether I can leave the house on weekends. And Mom won't stand up to him because she's terrified of losing the financial stability. What if we found a way for you to attend the conference without his permission? The suggestion hung in the air between them like a challenge. Isabelle was proposing something that went against everything they'd both been taught about family loyalty and obedience, but she was also offering Emma something she'd never had, the chance to choose her own path despite Brad's disapproval. How would that even work? Emma asked, but her tone suggested genuine interest rather than dismissal.
The conference is at ASU's downtown campus, right? I could pick you up Saturday morning at your tutoring center and drop you off there afterward. As far as Brad knows, you spent the day tutoring kids in math and science. You'd be back home at your usual time, and you'd have attended a conference that could genuinely help your college applications and your future. But what if he found out? What if someone saw us? Or what if the conference organizers post photos online? Those are real risks, Isabelle acknowledged. But Em, what's the risk of not going? What's the cost of letting him control every opportunity that comes your way? How many scholarships, conferences, internships, and experiences are you going to sacrifice to avoid his anger? Emma was quiet for several minutes. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier than before. I want to go. I'm scared of what might happen if he finds out, but I'm more scared of who I'm becoming when I let him make all my decisions. I used to be brave, Isabelle. I used to think I could change the world. I don't want to lose that completely. Then we'll make it work. I'll pick you up at the tutoring center at 8 a.m. on Saturday. Bring a change of clothes if you want to look more professional for the conference. And Em, bring that recorder with you. If Brad reacts badly to anything over the next few days, if his behavior escalates because he senses you're becoming more independent, we need to document it. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, unusual weather for Phoenix in December. Isabelle arrived at the tutoring center early, her stomach tight with nervous energy. When Emma emerged from the building, she looked transformed, confident in a way Isabelle hadn't seen since Emma was a little girl. She'd styled her hair professionally and wore a blazer that made her look older, more serious about her future. I can't believe we're doing this, Emma said as she got into Isabelle's car. I can't believe you're doing this, Isabelle replied. This is your choice, your courage. I'm just the transportation. The Arizona State University downtown campus was bustling with activity. Young women from high schools across the Phoenix metropolitan area were arriving for the conference, many accompanied by supportive family members. Isabelle felt a pang of sadness that their mother wasn't here to see Emma receive recognition for her achievements, but she pushed the feeling aside. Today was about Emma stepping into her own power. The conference theme was Leading Change, Young Women in Social Justice, and the agenda included workshops on advocacy, community organizing, and ethical leadership. As they walked through the registration area, Isabelle watched Emma's posture straighten with each interaction. Conference volunteers treated her like the accomplished young woman she was, asking thoughtful questions about her career goals and praising her scholarship essay. I'll pick you right here at 4 p.m. on Saturday. Have an amazing day. You've earned this. Emma turned back with tears in her eyes. Thank you for helping me remember that I deserve good things. While Emma attended workshops on topics like building resilient communities and from trauma to advocacy, Isabelle drove to a nearby coffee shop to wait. She used the time to catch up on work emails and reflect on how much both she and Emma had grown over the past few months. 6 months ago, Emma wouldn't have had the confidence to apply for the scholarship. 3 months ago, Isabelle wouldn't have had the courage to help Emma defy Brad's control. At 4 p.m. sharp, Isabelle returned to find Emma waiting outside the conference building, practically glowing with excitement. How was it? Isabelle asked as Emma got back in the car.
Life-changing, Emma said without hesitation. Isabelle, I met a girl who started a nonprofit to help teens in foster care when she was 17. I heard from a college senior who created a campus program to support first-generation students. I learned about internship opportunities and leadership programs and scholarships I'd never heard of. As they drove back toward the tutoring center, Emma continued sharing highlights from the day. But what struck Isabelle most wasn't the specific information Emma had gained. It was the transformation in her sister's voice. Emma sounded like herself again, like the curious, ambitious girl she had been before Brad's control had slowly eroded her confidence. The best part, Emma said, as they pulled into the tutoring center parking lot, was realizing that other people see leadership potential in me. Not just you, not just because you're my sister and you have to be supportive, but strangers who evaluated my application and thought I was worth investing in. As Emma gathered her things and prepared to return to her complicated family situation, Isabelle felt both pride and anxiety. They had successfully navigated Emma's first act of open defiance, but the real test would come in the following days. How would Brad react to Emma's renewed confidence? How would Emma handle the inevitable pressure to conform and submit? Remember, Isabelle said as Emma prepared to get out of the car, you did this. You applied for the scholarship, you earned it, you attended the conference, and you gained valuable knowledge and connections. No one can take that away from you, no matter what happens next. Emma nodded, straightening her shoulders. I know. And Isabelle, I'm not going back to being small and scared. I'm done apologizing for having dreams. As Isabelle watched her sister walk back into the tutoring center, she realized they had crossed a threshold. Emma was no longer just a victim seeking rescue. She was becoming an agent of her own liberation. The testing ground had revealed that Emma was stronger than either of them had fully realized, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do for someone was simply remind them of their own courage.
The confrontation Isabelle had been dreading came 3 days after the leadership conference, but not in the way she had anticipated. Instead of Brad discovering Emma's deception, it was Emma herself who triggered the crisis by making a decision that would shatter the fragile balance they'd been maintaining. Tuesday evening, Isabelle was reviewing patient charts when her phone exploded with rapid-fire text messages from Emma. I told him I went to the conference. I told him I won't apologize for pursuing my dreams. He's losing his mind. I think I made a huge mistake. Isabelle's hands shook as she called Emma immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. She tried 3 more times with the same result. Finally, she texted back, Are you safe? Do you need me to come there? The response took 20 minutes to arrive. Can't talk. He took my phone. Using Mom's. It's bad, Isabelle. Really bad. Against every instinct, screaming at her to drive to that house immediately, Isabelle forced herself to think strategically. If she showed up now, in the middle of an active crisis, she would only escalate the situation and potentially put Emma in more danger. But sitting in her apartment doing nothing felt like a form of torture. She called the crisis hotline Dr. Martinez had given her, desperate for guidance on how to help someone in immediate danger without making things worse. The most important thing right now is that your sister knows she has support and options, the counselor told her. But trying to intervene while emotions are running high could be counterproductive. Document everything, stay available, and be ready to act if she reaches out for immediate help. The next 12 hours were the longest of Isabelle's life. She kept her phone on loud all night, checking it obsessively for messages that didn't come. At 3 a.m., she finally received a text from Emma's number. This is Brad. Your sister has decided she needs some time to think about her behavior and her priorities. She won't be contacting you for a while. I suggest you respect our family's need for privacy during this difficult time. The message was clearly meant to sound reasonable to anyone who might see it, but Isabelle recognized it for what it was, a declaration that Emma's isolation was now complete. Brad had moved from emotional manipulation to active communication control. Wednesday dragged by without any contact. Isabelle found herself making mistakes at work again, her concentration shattered by worry and helplessness. Dr. Chen pulled her aside during the afternoon shift change. Belle, I think you need to take some time off again.
You're clearly dealing with a family crisis, and trying to function normally isn't working for you or for your patients. I can't take time off. I need to be available if... Isabelle stopped herself before explaining the situation. I need the routine right now. Being available doesn't mean being physically present at work if you can't focus on your responsibilities. Take the rest of the week. We'll manage coverage. Thursday morning brought a development that made Isabelle's stomach drop to the floor. She was drinking coffee and obsessively checking her phone when she noticed a notification from Facebook, a tagged photo from Desert Ridge High School's page. The image showed students at what appeared to be an academic awards assembly, and there, in the back row, was Emma. But Emma looked wrong. Her smile was too bright, too forced, and even in the grainy photo, Isabelle could see dark circles under her sister's eyes. The caption read, "Congratulating our Academic Excellence Award recipients for the first semester. These outstanding students represent the best of Desert Ridge High." Emma had won an academic award and hadn't been allowed to tell her sister. The achievement that should have been a celebration had become another tool of Brad's control. He was allowing Emma to receive recognition while cutting her off from anyone who might genuinely celebrate her accomplishments. But more troubling than Emma's absence from social media was the comment Brad had left on the post. "So proud of my stepdaughter, Emma, for learning to focus on what really matters, family values and academic responsibility. Sometimes young people need guidance to understand that individual achievement means nothing without family support." The comment was classic Brad, publicly supportive while sending a clear message about who deserved credit for Emma's success. But reading between the lines, Isabelle could see the threat embedded in his words. Emma's achievements were only valuable if she remained compliant and grateful. Friday brought the call Isabelle had been simultaneously hoping for and dreading. Emma's voice was barely above a whisper, and she sounded like she'd been crying. "I can only talk for a few minutes. I'm at school, hiding in the bathroom." "Em, are you okay? Are you hurt?" "Not physically, but Isabelle, I think I've ruined everything. After I told him about the conference, he didn't just get angry, he got scary calm. He sat me down and explained that my behavior had shown him I wasn't ready for the independence college would bring. He said maybe it would be better if I stayed home for a year after graduation, got a job, and proved I could be responsible before he invested any money in my education." Isabelle's heart sunk. Brad was systematically dismantling Emma's future, using her one act of courage as justification for increased control. Then he called all the colleges I had applied to and told them our family was reconsidering our financial commitment due to character concerns about my maturity level. Isabelle, he sabotaged my applications. Everything I've worked for since freshman year, all my plans, he destroyed them in one afternoon. The cruelty was breathtaking. Brad hadn't just punished Emma for attending the conference, he demolished her escape route entirely. "Em, listen to me. College applications can be resubmitted. Financial aid can be reapplied for. What he did was horrible, but it's not permanent damage." "But how? He controls all the financial information the applications require. And even if I could reapply somehow, how would I pay for it? He made it clear that any money he saved for my education is contingent on my demonstrating respect and maturity." Emma's voice broke completely. "I should never have gone to that conference. I should never have told him about it. I made everything worse for everyone."
This was the moment Isabelle had feared most. Emma's spirit breaking under the weight of Brad's retaliation. All the progress they'd made, all of Emma's growing confidence, was crumbling under the reality of just how much power Brad wielded over her life. "Emma, you did nothing wrong. You applied for a scholarship, earned it through your own merit, and attended a conference designed to help young women develop leadership skills. The fact that Brad is punishing you for those things doesn't make them mistakes. It makes his behavior abusive. But look at the consequences. I'm worse off now than I was before. At least when I was being compliant, I had a future. Now I have nothing." The despair in Emma's voice was devastating. Isabelle realized They had reached the crisis point that Dr. Martinez had warned her about, the moment when the victim's attempt to assert independence triggers such severe retaliation that they lose faith in the possibility of escape entirely. Em, do you remember what you told me after the conference? You said you weren't going back to being small and scared. You said you were done apologizing for having dreams. That was before I understood the cost. That was before I realized how much he could take away from me. He can take away money, and he can sabotage applications, but he can't take away your intelligence, your talents, or your determination. Emma, there are other paths to college, other ways to build the life you want, but only if you don't give up on yourself. Emma was quiet for so long that Isabelle thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat with resignation. I think I need to apologize to him. I think I need to try to fix this by showing him I've learned my lesson. Emma, no! Apologizing to an abuser for standing up for yourself only teaches them that their punishment worked. It doesn't make you safer, it makes you smaller. But what choice do I have? I'm 16 years old, with no money, no car that's actually mine, and now no college prospects. I can't survive on principle alone. The conversation ended with Emma having to return to class, but the damage was done. Isabelle could hear that her sister was retreating back into survival mode, preparing to sacrifice her dreams in exchange for basic security. All their progress, all of Emma's growing strength, was being eroded by the harsh reality of how thoroughly Brad controlled her life. That weekend, Isabelle reached out to everyone in her support network. Dr. Martinez, Lisa, the crisis hotline, even Janet Liu from the hospital's social work department. The consensus was devastating. Emma was experiencing exactly the kind of retaliation that made victims reluctant to seek help or assert independence. Without Emma being willing to take dramatic action, like leaving home or filing formal complaints, there was little anyone could do to protect her from Brad's psychological warfare. This is often the hardest part of the process, Lisa told her during an emergency coffee meeting. When victims realize the full cost of defiance, many of them retreat further into compliance than they were before. It can take years for them to gather the courage to try again. So I just watch him destroy her spirit? I just let him win? You continue to be available. You continue to remind her of her worth, and you document everything, because someday, maybe next month, maybe next year, she'll be ready to try again, and when that happens, you want to be prepared to help her succeed. Monday morning brought a text that confirmed Isabelle's worst fears. I talked to Brad yesterday. I apologize for being disrespectful and ungrateful. He's agreed to help me reapply to local colleges for next fall if I can prove I've learned to prioritize family values over selfish ambitions. I think this is the best path forward. I hope you understand. The message was clearly written under Brad's supervision, but Isabelle could read the defeat between the lines. Emma had surrendered, choosing short-term peace over long-term freedom. The sister who had glowed with confidence after the leadership conference was gone, replaced by someone who had learned that dreams were luxuries she couldn't afford. As Isabelle stared at the text, she realized this setback wasn't just about Emma. It was about her own naive belief that love and support would be enough to overcome years of systematic control. She had underestimated Brad's willingness to destroy Emma's future to maintain his power. And now they were both paying the price for her optimism. The major setback was complete. Emma had tasted freedom and found it too costly to maintain. Now Isabelle faced the hardest question of all. How do you help someone who has decided that giving up is safer than fighting back?
The turning point came in late January, not through any dramatic intervention, but through the doorbell camera Brad had installed to monitor his household. The same device meant to provide him with control would ultimately become the instrument of his downfall. Isabelle had spent 6 weeks watching Emma retreat further into compliance, their conversations reduced to stilted exchanges about school and weather. Emma had indeed reapplied to local colleges, written essays about family values and personal responsibility, and seemed to be settling into the role of a grateful, obedient daughter, preparing for a carefully circumscribed future. But appearances, as Isabelle had learned, could be deceiving. The call came at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. Detective Maria Santos from the Scottsdale Police Department was on the line, her voice professional but concerned. "Ms. Martinez, we have your sister Emma in protective custody at the hospital. She's physically okay, but she's been through a traumatic incident. We need you to come down as soon as possible." Isabelle's hands shook as she threw on clothes and drove through empty streets to Scottsdale Healthcare. In the emergency department, she found Emma sitting on a hospital bed, wrapped in a blanket, looking smaller than she had since childhood. Her left wrist was in a splint, and there were finger-shaped bruises on her upper arms that made Isabelle's stomach lurch. "What happened?" Isabelle whispered, taking Emma's uninjured hand. Emma's voice was hoarse, like she'd been screaming. "He found the recorder, the one you gave me months ago. I thought I'd hidden it well enough, but he was going through my room looking for my phone charger, and..." Emma's breath caught. "When he realized what it was, when he understood that I might have been recording him, he lost it completely." Detective Santos appeared in the doorway. She was a woman in her 40s with the kind of calm competence that reminded Isabelle of Dr. Chen, but with an edge that suggested she'd seen the worst of human behavior. "Ms. Martinez, thank you for coming so quickly. Your sister has been very brave tonight. She called 911 from a neighbor's house after a domestic violence incident that was captured on your family's doorbell camera." The irony was almost surreal. Brad's own surveillance system had recorded the very behavior he'd worked so hard to keep hidden. Emma managed to activate the camera's audio recording feature when she realized the situation was escalating. The entire incident is documented, both video and audio. What we captured tonight, combined with the recordings Emma had made previously on her personal device, provides clear evidence of a pattern of emotional and physical abuse. Emma looked at Isabelle with eyes that seemed decades older than they had just months before. "The recording I made back in October, I never deleted it. I kept it as, I don't know, insurance maybe? When the detective asked if I had any other evidence, I told her about it." Your sister's recordings document months of escalating verbal abuse, threats, and emotional manipulation. Tonight's incident involved physical violence, but the pattern of psychological abuse is equally clear. We have more than enough evidence to press charges. Isabelle felt a complex mix of relief and horror. Emma was finally safe, but the cost of that safety was visible in every line of her sister's exhausted face. "What happens now?" Isabelle asked. "Brad has been arrested and charged with domestic violence and child abuse. He'll likely be released on bail within 48 hours, but there's a protective order in place that prohibits him from having any contact with Emma or returning to the family home. Your mother is cooperating with the investigation." Emma's grip on Isabelle's hand tightened. "Mom saw everything. The camera footage shows Brad trying to intervene when I grabbed me, shows her calling 911 when I ran. She told the police that she's been scared of him for months but didn't know how to protect me." It was the validation Emma had needed for years. Their mother finally acknowledging that the situation was dangerous, finally choosing Emma's safety over family stability. Over the following weeks, the legal process moved with surprising efficiency. The doorbell camera footage was damning. It showed Brad's calm demeanor dissolving into rage when Emma refused to apologize for betraying the family's trust. The recording captured him grabbing Emma's wrist hard enough to sprain it, shaking him while screaming about disrespect and ingratitude, and threatening to teach her what real consequences look like. But more importantly, Emma's earlier recordings provided context that transformed the incident from an isolated moment of anger into evidence of sustained psychological abuse. The tapes documented Brad's systematic efforts to control Emma's future, his threats about college funding, his attempts to isolate her from friends and family, and his increasingly volatile reactions to any assertion of independence. The recordings were crucial, explained prosecutor Jennifer Walsh during one of their meetings. Physical abuse incidents can sometimes be explained away as momentary lapses in judgment, but these tapes show premeditation, a pattern of control and manipulation that demonstrates the defendant's mindset and intent. Emma's courage in preserving that evidence, even when doing so put her at risk, had provided the documentation needed to protect not just herself, but potentially other future victims. The legal resolution came faster than anyone expected. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the likelihood of a lengthy prison sentence if convicted, Brad accepted a plea agreement. He would serve 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation with mandatory anger management and domestic violence counseling. The protective order would remain in place for 5 years, and he would be required to pay restitution for Emma's medical expenses and counseling. But the real breakthrough wasn't legal, it was personal. Throughout the court proceedings, Emma transformed from a frightened victim into a powerful advocate for herself and others. She testified clearly and confidently about the impact of Brad's abuse, spoke eloquently about the importance of believing young victims, and even connected with other families going through similar situations. "I realized something during this process," Emma told Isabelle as they sat in a coffee shop near the courthouse after Brad's sentencing. "For years, I thought survival meant becoming smaller, making myself less threatening to him. But real survival meant becoming bigger. Bigger than his ability to control me, bigger than his version of who I was supposed to be." Emma had indeed become bigger. She'd been accepted to Arizona State University's social work program with a full scholarship. Ironically, her experience with domestic violence and her advocacy work had made her a compelling candidate for programs focused on social justice and family intervention.
The scholarship committee said my essay about transforming personal trauma into a passion for helping others was one of the most powerful they'd ever received, Emma said, smiling for the first time in months. Brad spent so much energy trying to convince me that my experiences made me damaged goods. Turns out, they made me exactly who I was meant to be. Their mother, Maria, had begun her own healing journey. With Brad out of the house and financial support from his required payments, she enrolled in a community college business program and started working part-time at a nonprofit organization that helped domestic violence survivors rebuild their lives. "I think I forgot who I was before I became someone's wife," Maria told her daughters during one of their weekly family dinners, a tradition they'd reestablished in Brad's absence. "I taught you girls to be grateful for stability, but I never taught you that you deserve to be happy. I'm still learning that lesson myself." Isabelle found her own career taking an unexpected direction. Her experience advocating for Emma led her to pursue additional training in trauma-informed care, and she eventually transferred to a specialized unit at Phoenix Children's Hospital that worked specifically with young victims of abuse and neglect. "You saved me," Eva said during one of their conversations, but Isabelle shook her head. "You saved yourself. I just refused to let you disappear." The doorbell camera footage that had captured Brad's violence was eventually used in training sessions for police officers and domestic violence advocates. Emma gave permission for her story to be shared as an educational tool, understanding that her experience could help others recognize the signs of abuse and understand the importance of documenting patterns of behavior. "The most important thing people need to understand," Emma told a conference of high school counselors 2 years later, "is that abuse doesn't usually look like what you see in movies. It looks like someone who claims to love you, slowly convincing you that your dreams are selfish, that your achievements don't matter, that you should be grateful for the cage they've built around you." Emma's recovery wasn't linear or simple. She struggled with anxiety, with hypervigilance, with the complex grief of losing the father figure she'd once trusted. But she also discovered reserves of strength and resilience that surprised everyone, including herself. By her junior year at ASU, Emma was leading a peer support group for college students from abusive backgrounds and interning at the same domestic violence organization where their mother worked. She'd found a way to transform her trauma into purpose, her survival into service. "I used to think that escaping abuse meant forgetting it ever happened. But I've learned that healing means integrating your experiences into something larger than yourself. My stepfather tried to make me small and grateful and silent. Instead, I became someone who helps other people find their voices." The doorbell camera that Brad had installed to maintain control over his household had instead provided the evidence needed to free Emma from his influence entirely.
technology meant to enable surveillance had become a tool of liberation, proof that the truth has a way of surfacing even when it's been carefully buried. Years later, when Isabelle looked back on that difficult period, she realized that the most important lesson hadn't been about rescue or intervention, it had been about the power of witness. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can do for someone isn't to save them, but to see them clearly, to refuse to let them become invisible, and to believe in their capacity for courage even when they've forgotten it themselves. Emma's story became a testament to the possibility of breaking cycles that seem unbreakable, of finding strength in the very experiences that were meant to destroy you, and of transforming survival into something that serves not just yourself, but everyone who comes after you. The truth behind closed doors had finally been exposed, not through dramatic intervention, but through patience, documentation, and the quiet courage of a young woman who refused to let herself disappear. And in the end, that truth had set them all free.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.